Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for the 1st of November 2023. As I'm giving you this report this morning, it's becoming increasingly evident that the panic is growing in the Western establishment, not only over the situation in Southwest Asia, but over the situation in Ukraine. It's clear Ukraine is running out of options, and this was evident from the testimony presented yesterday by Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and Secretary of State Blinken before various congressional committees. There were hearings on Biden's proposal for a supplemental budget fund, which would include a package of $105 billion more for the wars, $61.4 billion for Ukraine, $14.3 billion for Israel, some for the expectation of an Indo-Pacific war, and a little bit more spread around to a few other areas. Now, both Austin and Blinken testified in support of the whole package. Austin, who's a retired general and a former board member of military-industrial complex leader Raytheon, had this to say. He said, quote, "Without our support, Putin will be successful," unquote. Now, what does that mean? What is it that Putin wants? Well, according to the US and NATO, Putin wants to take over all of Europe. But that was never the indication if you go back to 2014 or even back to 2001. There was never an intent stated of that by Putin. In fact, for 8 years, Putin asked the US and NATO for security guarantees for Russia and for Ukraine. He also, the guarantees would include an end to killing by Ukrainian forces of Russian ethnic populations in eastern Ukraine, the Donbas region, as well as limited autonomy for that region, dismantling the Nazi networks in the defense and security forces who were largely responsible for the shelling that was killing people in Donbas, and also no to Ukraine's NATO membership application. For 8 years, there was no serious response from the West. There was the Minsk Agreement, which was guaranteed by France and Germany, but they admitted, the leaders of those two countries admitted that they had no intention of fulfilling the contract, the Minsk Agreement that they signed. Instead, they said they were trying to buy time for Ukraine to be built up as a military power. In other words, what Putin was talking to them about, making sure there's no further eastward motion of NATO, while they were lying about wanting peace, they were preparing for the Ukrainian military to attack Russia. Then after the February 2022 special military operation was launched, there were peace negotiations, which led to the Ukrainian negotiators initialing an agreement with Russia that would have basically fulfilled the requests of Putin. It was scuttled by Biden and NATO, who sent the hapless Boris Johnson there to give the orders to Zelensky, no negotiation. Now, while this war is continuing at tremendous cost to Ukraine, but also to the West, as well as to Russia. We're seeing opposition building to more Ukraine funding in the Congress, especially among House Republicans. Unfortunately, the same Republicans who are digging their feet in against Ukraine funding are pledging full support, led by the new Speaker of the House, Johnson, full support for Israel. So there's opposition to the Ukraine package. Johnson has said he would initiate a separate agreement for Israel. And the point is, the same neocon networks behind the Ukraine war and who were behind the Iraq war, the Syria war, the Libya war, and so on, the same neocon networks are the ones supporting Israel in its war in Gaza. So, and while there are some Republicans dragging their feet against the Ukraine funding, there's no such opposition from Democrats. And most Senate Republicans are fully behind the Biden plan for increased funds. This has been accelerated, the fight over Ukraine has been accelerated by the failure of the much-hyped counteroffensive by Ukraine. The question should be asked is if the initial $113 billion package was not enough to push back Russia and has depleted Ukraine's military as well as the Allied weapons stockpiles, why would more money do anything but extend the war and the killing? Now, this is what Blinken answered in the congressional hearing, where he argued that the money is needed to, quote, enhance, unquote, the U.S. defense sector. Listen carefully to his words. Here's what Anthony Blinken said, quote, the defense industrial base operates in a complex way. It's an interdependent unit. Making these investments together allows us to do what's needed to strengthen the defense industrial base and to seize the benefits and efficiencies that come from making these investments together rather than making them piecemeal. In other words, we need all the money now. And who's that we? It's the supporters of war in the military-industrial complex who are already getting close to $1 trillion a year in the defense budget. So this is really quite telling what Blinken had to say. Now then, Austin gave some specifics as to what they're requesting. He said $44.4 billion of the $61 billion for Ukraine includes $18 billion to replenish U.S. military weapons stockpiles reduced because weapons were sent to Kiev. Secondly, $12 billion for the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, which buys new weapons for Eastern European nations. Third, $5 billion to cover the cost of additional U.S. troops deployed to the region. For what purpose? Are they planning on fighting? Fourth, $2.7 billion to increase weapon production facilities. And the last one is $1 billion for the acquisition of critical defense articles like munitions. And Austin concluded his appeal by saying, this money is going right back into the coffers of America. And it was pointed out that this is a talking point that the Biden team has been trying to push in recent weeks. So if you're worried about money for border security, if you're worried about budget deficits, the collapse of infrastructure, the collapse of healthcare, forget about it. None of this is taken into consideration. And more importantly, voting for either package, the $105 billion for both wars, or the separate 14 point whatever billion gift to Israel, it's an act of submission by both parties in Congress, including most of the MAGA Republicans, to the military-industrial complex and their corporate cartels. And that's the reality of the situation. The Congress is a completely controlled entity, not just of the so-called Zionist lobby, but to the military-industrial complex and its commitment to war to defend a collapsing order. Now, meanwhile, yesterday, there was an attack on the Jabalia refugee camp in Gaza, which has had over 100 confirmed dead, many of which are women and children. And this has been confirmed by many different sources, not just the Hamas health ministry. The Israel Defense Force spokesman claimed that an organizer of the October 7th Hamas attack was killed and several of his top officials. And they knew that getting him would lead to collateral damage. In other words, they knew that women and children would be killed if they bombed that site to get the leader of Hamas. Now, those calling for a ceasefire are being called anti-Semites by the defenders of Netanyahu's mighty vengeance campaign. I think there was a highly appropriate response from Australian blogger Caitlin Johnstone. What she wrote is, quote, I refuse to be shamed and demonized for supporting peace by people who support the murder of thousands of children, unquote. Later today, I'll be having my weekly webcast dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche. That's live. It's 12 noon Eastern time in the United States. It's 5 p.m. in Europe. If you can't get it live, if you don't have the time for that, it will be archived and available. And the words coming from Helga Zepp-LaRouche are critical for shaping the fight against the neocons and the war agenda. So be sure to tune in for that. There's a link for it in the description box with this webcast or with this update. So thanks for joining me. I'll be back again tomorrow. Hello, thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos. Support our independence to produce videos like these. Become a member of the LaRouche organization at thelarouche.org/member. By becoming a member for $25 or more, you'll get special access to the EIR Alert Daily Briefing and Weekly Magazine, which is what I read to stay on top of things.